Hello, everybody. Welcome back, Spirit Squad. How's everyone doing today? So, a funny story. Oh, hi. I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin. This is Suspects and Spirits. I recorded this episode last night, and it was so late. It was so late. My daughter had gone to bed, and I was like, I got to do it. We have a busy week coming up. I'm going to record. I listened to it today to edit it, and I said, nope. I'm going to lose listeners. I was so tired and I was kind of like all over the place. So we don't want a repeat of episode 2. I know I lost some listeners after episode 2. That was not my best work, and I apologize for that, but it's going to happen. It's a learning process. So how's everyone today? Obviously, I've had some coffee and I am ready to record. First things first, I'm blonde now. That's right. And I think I'm going to go even blonder. I needed a summer shakeup. My hair is usually dark like my soul, but I was getting bored and it needed some dimension. You know, girls, you know what I mean. If you have any recommendations though for me for good color treated hair products, hit me up because I have super like thin, fine hair. It's very shiny and healthy and soft, and I want to keep it that way. But I can't use anything too heavy or I end up looking like I auditioned for Grease and got cast as the pomade. I need something lightweight that keeps the shine without looking like a member of the T-Birds. Okay. I do love that movie. I love Kinnicky. Hickey from Kinnicky is like a Hallmark card. You guys know what I mean. So hair people, hit me up. Let me know what products to use in my hair. Do I need a purple shampoo? I have no idea. Please help me. All right, my skipperoonies. If you're a skipper, you can stop skipping now. I'm done talking about my hair. We're going to jump in to this episode because today we're covering a haunting so bizarre, it doesn't just involve ghosts. It involves a bunk bed. Yes, a bunk bed. Because why settle for, creepy footsteps and flickering lights when you can center your paranormal activity and horror around the ultimate symbol of childhood sleepovers and chaos? This is the story of the Tallman House Haunting, a Wisconsin urban legend that's part ghost story and part, what? No way that happened. And then 100% creepy enough to actually have made an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in the 1980s. Yep, that's right, guys. It got the Robert Stack treatment. This story went viral, 1980s viral. And I will be using that episode as one of my sources today because it is just that good. I miss that show so much. I was really into it as a kid, and I'm very happy to include it in my sources today. So let's dive in. I hope I can do it some justice. Here we go. Our story begins in a small town in Wisconsin because apparently spirits love the Midwest. Maybe it's the cheese. Ask her if she likes cheese. My favorite's Gouda. If you don't know that quote, I'm so sorry you've never seen one of the best movies ever made. Anyways, let's meet the Tallmans. Alan and Debbie Tallman were your average, hardworking, Midwestern couple in the 1980s. They moved into a very charming, slightly aging farmhouse with their 3 young children in a very small town called Horicon, Wisconsin. The kids' names were never made public in the Unsolved Mysteries episode, and they were never made public in any of the articles I found. So we are going to stick with their pseudonyms that were used in my sources. Their 3 children were Mary Ann, who was about a year old, Sarah, who was about 2 at the time, and Mary Ann and Sarah shared a room. And then there was their older son, Danny. He had his own room, but his age was never confirmed in the story. So I'm not sure how old he was. So yeah, you heard that right. A 1 and a 2-year-old sharing a room. And not just a room, a bunk bed. That's a little wild to me, but it was the 80s. Have you seen car seats from the 80s? They were barely a thing. And I mean, there were literally commercials asking parents, do you know where your kids are? So yeah, a 1 and a 2-year-old sharing a bunk bed. I wonder who got the top bunk. Hopefully the 2-year-old. They're a little more sturdy. If they were to fall. That makes me so nervous. Oh my gosh. All right. So this bunk bed, the Tallmans had bought a second-hand bunk bed from a local furniture store. They initially assembled it in the basement before moving it upstairs to the girls' rooms. And After moving in, everything was really quiet. Everything was good until February of 1987, shortly after they moved that bunk bed upstairs. That's when strange things started happening, and it started with the children. Marianne, who was barely a toddler, remember she's one, began reporting odd noises and experiences centered around the bed. Now, kids at that age, they're not even capable of lying in like the manipulative, story driven way that older kids can. At 1 year old, they're pretty much just beginning to grasp basic communication and cause and effect. They're just starting to recognize theory of mind, which is basically learning that we have thoughts that are different from theirs. So when a little one is saying that weird things are happening, it's usually not fiction. Like, believe them. These girls were young, 1 and 2. So please keep that in mind in this story. So the girl said that the bed would rock on its own, shaking even when no one was on it. Now, I'm not a bunk bed expert, but I don't think they're supposed to do that. So they would tell their parents, the bed keeps rocking. And then came the real terror. Not only was this bed seemingly moving on its own, but these little girls started to tell their parents that they were seeing a shadowy figure that they called the witch. And they said that she had glowing eyes and she looked like she was on fire. And if that wasn't enough, all of the kids, all three of them, shortly after moving into this home, started getting sick constantly. Fevers, unexplained illnesses. Debbie, their mother, said that they were at the doctor's office constantly and no one could figure out what was wrong. She said that at one point she had all three of them in the doctor's office at the same time and she was just beside herself. She was exhausted. She was desperate because why are her kids sick so much and why aren't they getting better? I mean, if you've ever had sick kids, it is exhausting. I can't imagine having three of them sick all the time. So that kind of struck the mom as very strange. These had been pretty healthy kids up until this point when they moved into this home. So the little girls are reporting that strange things are happening. They're getting sick. And then Danny, the older brother, began having strange experiences too. He had recently inherited his parents' old clock radio. And one night he came running out of his room into the living room in a panic. And he told his parents that the radio dial had moved on its own. So on those old radios, there's a little indicator, right? And it moves from one side to the other. Danny said that it moved by itself without him touching it. And the station started changing. At first, Alan and Debbie, they just kind of brushed it off. Kids, they'll be kids. They're going to lie. They're going to make up stories. So they were like, okay, if this is such a big deal, we're just going to take the radio out of your room. Like, this isn't really happening. Stop making up stories. We're going to take the radio away. So they took the radio out, and at the time, Danny didn't know anything about his sister's experiences. His parents hadn't told him about the witch, and they hadn't told him about the bed moving or anything on its own. So it was very surprising to his mom when a few weeks later, he told her that he saw an old woman glowing like fire standing in his doorway. That's when Debbie said, "Hold up. Okay, something's weird here." She started to believe that there was something wrong in their home. Now, the Tallmans were devoutly religious people. So, this kind of thing was not something that was on their radar. They didn't believe in spirits. They didn't believe in, ghosts. They believed in God. And they weren't really putting up with these stories. But now Debbie is starting to wonder. Debbie's like, could there really be something happening in my home? And soon her husband, Alan, started to feel the effects too. He began having violent visions, images of his family being murdered, their bodies in the home and just brutally destroyed. He said, quote, "I was afraid for my life. I was afraid for my family. I had visions of coming home from work and seeing them destroyed," end quote. So that's very unsettling. We all have intrusive thoughts every once in a while, some of us more than others, but this was on another level. And this man, he didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in this stuff. He was extremely skeptical. But now he's exhausted, he's paranoid, and he's unraveling because not only are his children saying that things are happening, They're losing sleep. They won't go in their rooms. They won't go to bed. They're all scared. And now his wife is saying, I think that there might be something in our home. He's trying to deny it. And he's starting to just feel all of that anxiety building inside of him. But at the same time, he won't admit that something's happening. But then one evening, Alan went to paint the basement walls. He was downstairs and he was working away, and then he decided he was going to take a break because his wife called him up for dinner. So he set the paintbrush down on the table and he went up to eat. When he came back down later after dinner, the brush was not in that same spot. It had been moved. Now the brush was inside the paint can with its bristles up, the handle submerged inside the paint. No one does that. People don't put paintbrushes in there like that. And he claims no one had been down there. No one had touched it. So my first thought was maybe the kids went down there and they messed with the paintbrush and they plopped it in there. But according to Alan, he said they were all upstairs eating. No one had been down in the basement during that time. So this startled him a bit. Another time in this basement, remember, this is where they assembled the bunk bed. He discovered that the basement window had been removed. The whole last window had been just taken away, just taken out. And it was placed neatly against the wall. There were no signs of a break-in and no valuables were missing. So it was just very weird. Debbie said that after this, she refused to go downstairs. She would not go in the basement. She felt like something was very off. She said she felt as though something was watching her. Debbie also mentioned that in order to reach this window, you would need a chair. There were no chairs down there in order to get to the window. So the Tallmans did what most people would do in this situation. They got a dog, hoping it might deter any kind of intruder. But the dog acted really bizarre. He was barking at the house from the outside. And then once he got inside, he was clawing at the door, scratching, just desperate to get away. He would stare at the basement door and just growl. And he would not go into Marianne and Sarah's room. The neighborhood dogs acted strangely as well. They would bark at the home from the outside anytime they passed. And listen, I know I always say trust your lizard brain, but also trust your dog. Okay. My dog is scared of a lot. She's scared of, garbage bags and the vacuum, but she's also hella nosy and she wants to be everyone's friend. When we take her on walks, she wants to sniff everything. She wants to see everything. If she is suddenly like weirded out and she doesn't want to go near something, I'm going to trust her. I know that dogs are a little more in tune to energies than we are. So I'm sorry. The dog's acting weird. I'm out. Bye. I trust them more than I trust myself. And it wasn't just the basement that they started having strange feelings in. Alan said he hated going into his garage. He felt like he was being watched in there too. He mentioned at one point, quote, "When I closed the garage door, I felt like I was shutting myself in a tomb," end quote. And meanwhile, Sarah, just 2 years old, kept saying that the witch was in her room. Her and Marianne were both repeatedly telling their parents there was something in their room watching them, and it was terrifying them. These little girls did not want to sleep in their room. Now, because the Tallmans were a devoutly religious family, they preferred to seek help through the church for all of this bizarre behavior. They didn't want to go through any paranormal investigators, any paranormal channels, so with nowhere else to turn and just desperate for help, they decided to call their pastor. His name was Reverend Dobratz. According to Unsolved Mysteries, while the Tallmans' identities were hidden, you know how they like black out the faces during the interviews, the pastor actually appeared on camera, openly discussing the experience. When the pastor visited, he immediately felt an evil presence. He said, quote, "I believe the entity was demonic. I still believe it," end quote. So when the pastor came and started mentioning the way he felt to the Tallmans, this validated Debbie's fears. Debbie, remember, had been starting to become less skeptical and a little more worried that there was something dark in their home. And Alan, still sort of skeptical, began to accept that maybe something sinister might truly be going on. According to the Tallmans, they never had a moment's peace. Doors would slam, voices would call out to them, and Alan's visions persisted. The children were terrified, but the breaking point came just before Christmas when Danny, their son, saw something that horrified him once again. He was laying on the couch, and suddenly he started screaming. He was crying. He was inconsolable. And Alan finally had it. He snapped. He was shouting in the air, challenging the spirits, saying, whatever's in this house, fight me, leave my kids alone, which is a big no-no. Do not ever challenge an entity, ever. I don't care how religious you are, how much Palo Santo and sage you have. Don't do it. Now, after he did this, I think he was feeling like, he got rid of something because there was a little bit of quiet for about 3 weeks until January 7th around 2 a.m. That night, Alan was returning home from work. As he walked up to his home, he started hearing a howling wind, which was very strange because it was a calm, still night. And then he heard a voice whisper to him. The voice said, "Come here." He looked around the house. Nothing. He checked around the corners. He went around the side of the house. There was no one there. Again, he heard the voice, "Come here." So he looked toward the garage. Alan saw his garage engulfed in flames. He ran inside, threw down his lunch pail on the ground, and ran back outside. I assume he went in to get something to put the fire out. But when he ran outside, the garage was totally fine. There was no fire. There was no more voices. There was no wind. And he was shooketh. He ran back inside. He locked the door. He deadbolted it. When he reached down to grab his lunch pail again and head into his room, the lunch pail flew across the room straight out of his hand. He ran into his bedroom, and Debbie later said, quote, "He was just running around the room. He ran into the bedroom, he ran around the bed, threw his keys on the dresser. I've never seen him like that before." End quote. Now, after this chilling experience, Alan began to believe his daughters. And so he began sleeping on the floor of his daughter's room each night. The fear in his children's eyes were now mirroring his own. He believed them. But what could he do? The girls were still traumatized, struggling to sleep, and Alan clearly felt a deep need to both protect and understand what was happening. But that very first night in his daughter's room, something terrifying happened to him, and it changed him forever. As he lay on the floor trying to sleep, Alan began to see a fog appear from the base of the bed. And from that fog, a voice emerged. He was paralyzed, literally frozen on the floor, unable to move, unsure of what to do. Finally, he was able to get up and he ran out of their room. Debbie recalls the aftermath. In the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, Debbie said, quote, "When he came out of the bedroom, he wouldn't talk to me. His lips were blue. He was so white, I tried to get him to tell me what happened, but all he did was stand there. He had tears running out of his eyes. And so I went to the phone and I called the pastor and I said, 'You got to come over here.' I said, 'Something happened and Alan's crying.' I said, 'He won't tell me what happened.'" End quote. So, okay, at this point, my friends, if your husband, your spouse, your wife is white as a ghost, their lips are blue, first of all, check for a heart attack. And then second of all, if they're crying and unable to speak after you just heard your kids say that there's a witch in their room, pack it up, baby. We're leaving. Bring the pastor, sure, but you can call him on your way out. But they stayed in the home, and the pastor did come. And when he arrived, he described Alan as visibly shaken, trembling with fear. He said, quote, "Alan gave me no indication at all that he was in any way fabricating what he was telling me. And my sense of that was heightened by the fact that I've been with people before who had described things similar to what Alan was describing. And his fear and terror and what he had seen was very similar to what I had seen before." So now the pastor has validated these experiences twice. But yet nothing was being done. They weren't cleansing the home. They weren't doing any kind of rituals because they didn't believe that that was going to do anything. They just thought having their pastor come and talk to them and just be there would somehow help the situation. They didn't proceed with any kind of cleansing. So a few days later, when Alan had to work late, he had asked a relative to stay over and help Debbie with the kids. He had been sleeping in the girl's room at night, and he wanted someone there to take care of his family. So this relative, who was a complete skeptic, agreed. They were like, yeah, no big deal. I'll come stay there. Nothing's happening. It also made Debbie feel safer to have another adult in the house. But most importantly, it gave her a chance to have another witness. And that night, their skeptical relative became a believer because the same figure that the family had been seeing, that terrifying witch like entity, appeared again. This time, it was seen by the relative when he was in the girl's room. He screamed when he saw it and he ran out of the bedroom in a panic. He was followed by Danny and 2-year-old Sarah. Debbie heard the commotion and ran to meet them, frantically asking what had happened. The man was shaken. She asked him, "Where's the baby?" and then shouted for him to go get her. It sounds like to me the baby was still asleep in the room because, kids will sleep through anything. Debbie said, quote, "Get her. We're leaving ourselves." I said, "I'm never coming back to this house." I said, "I don't care. I've had it. I can't handle this." End quote. And you know what? Valid. Absolutely valid. I too would say, fuck this. We're leaving. I don't care if we just bought this house. My kids can't sleep. We're all terrified. Something is happening that we can't explain. Goodbye. And at this point, having another person not previously involved and definitely not a believer before had witnessed this entity. So for Debbie, this was confirmation that it wasn't just trauma or sleep deprivation or paranoia. She wasn't imagining this, and neither were her children. That night, she hurried everyone out of the house and fled what she had once hoped would be their forever home. As they pulled out of the driveway that night, Danny looked back and he yelled, "Mom, it's looking out the window at us." Debbie didn't even look back. She believed her son. She took his word for it. She just kept driving. They went straight to Alan's work, where Debbie told him what had happened. She told him she would not, under any circumstances, return to that house. Later that night, Alan drove by the house. When Debbie and the kids and the relative had left, the only lights that were left on in the house was the living room and Danny's bedroom. When Alan drove by, every single light in the home was on. He had reported this to his wife, and she said, "No, that's impossible. We left all the lights off. The only lights that were on were in the living room where I was and Danny's room because he was still awake." That night, they stayed with Alan's mother. The next morning, Alan returned to the house to get some of their belongings, and this time, only the living room lights were on. The light in Danny's room was off, and so was every other light that had been on when he drove by the night before. So Alan, trying to figure out if there was some kind of logical explanation for this, he played around with the lights, trying to figure out, if there was an issue with the electricity, with the breaker, but he found no problem at all. A few days later, they picked up the rest of their belongings and moved in with relatives nearby. Reverend Dobritz, their pastor, and another pastor then decided they were going to conduct a house cleansing ritual of prayers and scripture readings. At this point, it wasn't long until rumors about the house started to spread. Some in the neighborhood claimed there was a portal to hell in the basement, that blood dripped from the walls. One neighbor even said a snowblower cleared the whole driveway on its own, but I don't know what that has to do with anything. There were rumors flying, and none of them were consistent. The only people who knew what had really happened were the Tallmans, and they refused to talk about it to their neighbors or the media. They wanted to protect their family and their identities as much as possible. People would drive by or walk by the house. The police even ended up having to briefly barricade the street to keep people away because people are always going to be looky-loos. On January 21st, Horicon Police Chief Doug Glauman had contacted Alan. Alan and his family were still very frightened, and they were having trouble sleeping. He was very unwilling to discuss the events that had unfolded in his home because he didn't want to make himself seem crazy, which I can totally understand. People aren't always willing to believe things like this. But Chief Glauman convinced the Tallmans to come to the police station and discuss their experiences. It's speculated that the police did this in order to make sure that there was no indication of break-ins or, being tormented by someone in the area, which is good. I'm glad the police were trying to help. And after Chief Glauman had met with the Tallmans, he actually believed that they were sincere and had been through a, quote, emotionally draining experience. He promised them confidentiality and tried to protect them from the press and the bystanders. He also convinced them to meet with the Milwaukee Sentinel journalist James Nelson to dispel the rumors about the hauntings, in hopes that people would leave them alone and stop trying to go to their house. On January 25th, 1988, Reverend Dobritz decided he was going to return to the house again and incite the entity. Chief Glauman and two officers actually came with him because they wanted to see the home for themselves as well as this bunk bed. They spent 3 hours looking for recorders, projection devices, or any other evidence that the Tallmans had been either the victim of a prank or lying, but nothing was found. While they were there, Chief Glauman and the two officers that were with him heard the phone ring, and the phone rang a few times. When they answered it, the line was dead. So they decided maybe it's somebody trying to prank call and they disabled the receiver, but the phone rang again. And when they picked it up, the line was dead. I know, it's giving Scream, right? Scream vibes. So everyone was bugging, all right? Everyone was kind of freaking out at this point. And after the Tallmans had left their home, the police went further into their investigation. As stated before, Chief Glauman believed they were telling the truth. He found no issues in their backgrounds or anything indicating that, they had a habit of doing things like this. He even went as far as to have an outside investigator and an electrical engineer search the house. They found nothing. Chief Glauman decided to ask social welfare professor named Dr. Don Mueller, a parapsychologist named Carl Schultz, and a retired parapsychology professor by the name of Walter Uphoff to come investigate the home. On January 31st, Dr. Mueller, Schultz, and Uphoff visited the house. Schultz claims he felt psychic hotspots in several parts of the home, including the basement and near the bunk bed. Remember, the bunk bed had been assembled in the basement. Uphoff proposed that a spirit was attached to the house, the land, or perhaps some furniture, like, I don't know, maybe the bunk bed. He noted that changes in living arrangements can often upset spirits. Now, overall, this group of investigators, they found no evidence of fraud in the home. They believed the Tallmans' experiences were genuine and unexplainable at best. There was speculation among them that maybe the Tallmans' home perhaps had been built on Native American burial ground because this is America and we stole it, and that is very much a possibility. But when Chief Glauman searched the records, he found no evidence to support that theory. The area was just marshland before houses were built there. Later on, he decided he was going to end the police investigation because he found no evidence of a prank or criminal activity, and he also found no explanation for the reported phenomena. So there was just nothing they could do. So what happened with the bunk beds? Well, 2 weeks after they fled their home, Alan and Debbie had the bunk beds destroyed. Word had soon gotten around, as I stated before, about what had happened because, small towns, everybody is asking about it. Somebody asked Debbie, "Do you think this thing can follow you?" And Debbie said, quote, "I never thought it could happen the first time, so I don't know if this is the end of the story," end quote. The Tallmans ended up moving to another city, and they haven't experienced any further paranormal phenomenon. After the Tallmans left, a new family moved into the house, and they've had no problems. So you may be asking yourself, why did they destroy the bunk bed? Did they know it was the bunk bed? Did they confirm anything? Or did they always think it was the house? Soon after fleeing, the Tallmans realized that the strange occurrences they had experienced happened right around the same time they brought the bunk bed into their home. They had lived in the home only a short time, less than a month, before getting the bunk bed, and realized they hadn't had anything weird happen before bringing this item into their house. They speculated that the activity centered around the room where the bed was located, and most of the occurrences were affecting those who slept in or near the bed. Danny's room happened to be right next to the girl's room. And remember, the dad and the brother and the relative, all of whom who either slept in the room or near it, saw things. The mother never slept in the room, and she never saw the witch engulfed in flames. But it was the other happenings, the kids getting sick, her son mentioning the witch when it had never been mentioned to him, the door slamming, the disembodied voices, her husband's strange, erratic, paranoid behavior, and the fear so strong it made him cry. Those things were what made her think that the home was haunted, even though she never saw the witch herself. And that's why, after they left the home, they had the bed destroyed in a landfill. Then they burned it and buried it, hoping to rid themselves of whatever was attached to it. And since the new residents and the Tallmans have not had any further experiences, I think it's pretty safe to assume that whatever was tormenting this poor family was in direct correlation with the bunk bed itself. So the bed was destroyed on February 13th, 1988. If you know about haunted objects, you know that spirits or demonic forces can attach themselves and the object acts as a conduit. That is exactly what they think was happening with the bunk beds. After destroying it, everything seemed to go back to normal. Everything was fine. Were there skeptics? Of course. There are plenty of skeptics who have speculated that maybe black mold, trapped marsh, or methane gas seeping into the house, a natural gas leak, had caused the Tallman's experiences, which we've all heard about before. Sometimes things like visions, hallucinations, paranormal experiences are in fact linked to such occurrences like a gas leak. But my thing that I keep focusing on is that the family who moved in after them had no issues at all. And a year after the Tallmans had moved out, the Wisconsin Power and Light Company had gone around to replace faulty gas fittings at some of the Horicon houses, but there were never any faulty fittings found at their house or even any on their street. The company noted that they didn't check for gas leaks at the home during the time of the hauntings. But again, I would like to note that if there were a gas leak at that time, then the family who moved in following them would also have experiences of their own. Because if you leave a gas leak, it's still there and it's still going to cause problems. Now, is it possible that when they moved in, they had a gas leak fixed? Absolutely, totally. But I can't find any evidence of this happening. It would have been the same company. Horicon, Wisconsin only had 3,800 residents at this time. So they had this one power and light company. They were the company responsible for doing all of that kind of work. And I can't find anything in my research that says they went to fix a gas leak. Some skeptics even theorized that the Tallmans made up their story for money. Apparently, the Tallmans were having some financial difficulties, which, aren't we all? And journalist James Nelson noted they lost $3,000 when they allowed their mortgage holder to assume their house's title, which, that happens. They had to leave suddenly. But the kicker is that they were offered $5,000 by the National Enquirer, and they turned it down. They said no, they don't want to make money off of their children's misfortune. They were really trying hard to keep their identities private. A few years later, in January of 1989, Chief Glauman, who had once said, he believed them, he started to state that he became somewhat skeptical of the Tallman story after they allowed Unsolved Mysteries to feature it. He believed they received money for appearing on the show. Sorry if you heard my dog snore. She's so loud. So he thinks they got money for appearing on this show. So your girl looked it up. Okay, I looked it up so you don't have to. You can if you want to. But it's pretty clearly stated that there was no payment given for people to appear on the show and tell their stories. Victims, witnesses, and families who went on the show did so voluntarily, and the show's producers said numerous times that the point of the show was to publicize a case, not to compensate for it. And this helped maintain the show's credibility and avoided incentivizing exaggerated or false claims. For the Tallmans, they went on the show, but they didn't want to show their faces. They wanted to remain as anonymous as possible. People would know their last name, sure, but not what they looked like. And in the 80s and 90s, that was much easier to accomplish than it is now. Even during my research, I tried to see if I could find a picture of the family. There isn't one. There's pictures of Tallman families, but it's not this one. They're from a long time ago. So they did a pretty good job at keeping their identities private. Chief Glomman also stated that he heard they'd sold their story to Michael Norman, who later wrote Haunted America, which featured their story. But this is just hearsay. It was never confirmed. Their case was featured without their direct involvement. There's no record of them being involved in any kind of book deal. And in 1994, the Tallmans reported that their lives had improved tremendously after leaving Horicon, and that they had not experienced any hauntings since leaving. So Chief Glomman really went from, I believe you, and then the phone ringing, disconnecting it, and the phone's still ringing, and being like, oh my gosh, let's bring in some paranormal investigators, to then being like, I don't know. They told their story, so I don't believe them. I don't know, guys. I can understand why someone might find that odd. Like, oh, you want to stay, like you don't want any attention for what had happened, but yet you sell your story to Unsolved Mysteries. I can see how that would make you feel skeptical, but I'm just saying, just me, okay? In my research, no one was ever compensated for being on the show. However, I am a believer. Okay. I believe people when they say things like their home is haunted and they've done every other route possible to find a logical explanation. Even, our friends Ed and Lorraine Warren, may they rest in peace, they were somewhat problematic in their methods and things that they did. There's a lot of controversy surrounding that couple. Do I love them? Totally. Absolutely love them. So I know that sometimes these things are a bit exaggerated for story purposes, but this one to me it feels weird. Why are a 1 and 2-year-old talking about a scary witch in their room? There were some reports that I found that said, oh, well, they watched a scary movie and that's where they heard it from. Who the hell is letting their 1 and 2-year-old watch a scary movie? I mean, yeah, I know it was the 80s, but come on, guys. This was a devoutly religious family. I don't think they're watching horror movies, okay? I don't think that's what was going on. So that, my friends, is the story of the Tallman House bunk bed haunting. Truly a fascinating story, if you ask me. And I like this story because it reminds us that paranormal experiences aren't always about, someone died in that hotel or there was a fire and a bunch of people perished. Sometimes it's not about the ghosts. There is evil in this world for sure. And I believe that we just aren't in tune to some of it. Some of us are more sensitive than others, but it can also occur in objects. Things can attach themselves. You got to say goodbye when doing a Ouija session. You have to. Okay, there are rules. If you're trying to open a portal, you got to close it. Stop leaving them open. Follow the rules or don't do it. At one point, the Reverend in this story even said that he thought maybe the bunk bed had been used for some kind of Ouija board sessions or seances that weren't closed properly. That did come up in my research. And I was like, oh yeah, that could have happened. I don't fuck around with that stuff. If you're gonna play that way, you better win the game. I mean, stop talking to spirits if you're not gonna do the right thing. Stop using techniques if you don't know how to use them. You got to know what you're doing. You can't just mess around with this stuff. So, I mean, what do you guys think? Was the bunk bed haunted? Was the house haunted? I would love to know your thoughts on the case. You can give me your 2 cents on the Instagram post, the TikTok post about this, or on the Facebook page. And that, my spooky little sleuths, is all I have for you today. That's it for this episode of Suspects and Spirits. If you have ever had a creepy bunk bed experience or, maybe a sleepover Ouija board session that got a little too real, hit me up on social media. Send in an email or DM me for the upcoming Booze Clues episode. You can share your own ghost stories, stories that family members have told you, hometown crimes that you feel need to be told. Send them in. I want all of them. While you're doing that, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, and then follow it wherever you follow things. The reviews help tremendously, so submitting a review on Apple Podcasts is a great way to get the pod up there in the charts. Go show the pod some love, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend who loves a good haunted story. Help spread the word. Until next time, stay curious, but not too curious. Don't buy secondhand bunk beds unless you're going to sage the shit out of them, okay? Trust your dog when they get a weird vibe. And of course, trust your lizard brain. Goodbye.